Why just trust everyone was not a founding principle. There is a certain comforting myth that floats through modern political conversation, that people, and by extension states, are generally reasonable, cooperative, and only occasionally tempted by power. It's a charming idea. It is also precisely the illusion that Alexander Hamilton set out to dismantle in Federalist No. 6. The premise, are we naturally peaceful? In Federalist No. 6, Hamilton takes aim at a popular belief of his time, that the American states, if left loosely connected, would live together in harmony, bound by shared culture, mutual interest, and the occasional polite disagreement over tariffs. His response, translated into modern terms, is essentially, have you met humans? Hamilton argues that nations, even those with shared language, religion, and history, have always found reasons to quarrel. Commerce, territory, pride, and ambition are not bugs in the system. They are the system. To prove his point, he doesn't speculate. He points to history, city-states, confederacies, neighboring powers, all convinced they were too enlightened for conflict right up until they weren't. Enter the anti-federalists, the optimists, or skeptics, depending on your mood. Across the aisle stood the anti-federalists, a loose but passionate group that included voices like Patrick Henry. They weren't naive so much as wary, deeply suspicious of centralized power and convinced that a strong federal government might become the very tyranny the revolution had just escaped. Their counter-argument to Hamilton went something like this. Yes, humans are flawed. That's exactly why we shouldn't concentrate power in a distant national authority. Where Hamilton feared chaos between states, the anti-federalists feared control from above. Where Hamilton saw disunity as a path to conflict, they saw unity as a potential path to oppression. In short, Hamilton worried about too little government. The anti-federalists worried about too much. Both agreed on one thing. Humans are not angels. They just disagreed on which flaw would ruin the country faster. Satirical interlude, the neighborhood HOA theory of government. Imagine 13 neighbors sharing a large property. Hamilton walks in and says, look, if we don't create a structured HOA with enforceable rules, you're all going to end up in disputes over fences, noise, and who owns the lake. The anti-federalists respond, an HOA? Absolutely not. That's how you end up with Karen measuring your grass at 7 a.m. and fining you for the angle of your mailbox. Hamilton replies, yes, but without it, Steve is already building a dock into your yard and calling it regional expansion. Both sides pause. Steve continues building. The core disagreement, human nature versus power structure. Hamilton's argument in Federalist No. 6 rests on a sober, some might say cynical view of human nature. He assumes that states, like individuals, will pursue their interests, form rivalries, and occasionally escalate those rivalries into conflict. This is not pessimism. It's pattern recognition. The anti-federalists didn't deny this entirely, but they believed the greater danger lay in giving too much authority to a centralized system that could override local autonomy and individual liberty. And here's where the real genius of the American system emerges. It didn't fully side with either. Constitutional republic, the compromise nobody loves, which is why it works. The Constitution that emerged and was recorded so carefully by James Madison did not create a pure democracy. That was never the goal. A democracy, in its simplest form, risks becoming a system where majority will override all restraint. A structure Hamilton and others knew could be just as dangerous as monarchy, only louder. Instead, the framers designed a constitutional republic. Power originates with the people but is filtered through structures, representation, and limits. Authority is divided, checked, and deliberately slowed. Why? Because they didn't trust king's crowds, or frankly, each other. And that lack of trust was not a flaw, it was the feature. Satirical interlude, the just let the people decide. Experiment fast forward to today. Someone inevitably says, why don't we just let the people decide everything directly? To which Federalist No. 6 might gently respond, because the people occasionally decide things like panic buying toilet paper. Meanwhile, the anti-federalists whisper, and the people in charge of the system occasionally decide things like expanding their own power. And just like that, we're back where we started, caught between chaos and control, trying to pretend there's a third option called everyone behaves perfectly. There isn't. The real lesson of Federalist No. 6. Hamilton wasn't arguing for power for its own sake. He was arguing for structure in the face of predictable human behavior. Conflict between states wasn't a distant possibility, it was a near certainty without a stronger union. The anti-federalists, for their part, ensured that this stronger union would not become unchecked authority. Together, their tension produced something durable, a system that assumes ambition will exist, conflict will rise, power will expand if left alone, and then builds guardrails accordingly. Final reflection: why it still matters. There is a quiet irony in modern debates. People often argue as if the Constitution was designed for ideal conditions: rational actors, informed voters, restrained leaders. It wasn't. It was designed by people who had studied history long enough to expect the opposite. Hamilton, in Federalist No. 6, reminds us that unity is not natural, it is constructed. The anti-federalists remind us that power is not self-limiting, it must be restrained. And the Constitution sits between them, not as a perfect solution, but as a disciplined compromise. Which is perhaps the most unromantic and most accurate truth of all. The American system works not because it trusts human nature, but because it doesn't. Help us restore our republic. Vote Rachel Fox for U.S. Senate this November 3rd.